Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Have you ever thought about how much your emotions influence your health? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Dr. Bradley Nelson, is author of the best-selling book, The Emotion Code. It explains how to identify and release trapped emotions that block us from wellness. A holistic chiropractor and medical intuitive, Dr. Nelson is one of the world's foremost experts in the emerging fields of bioenergetic medicine and energy psychology. His website is discoverhealing.com, and he joins me this week to share his groundbreaking work and book, The Emotion Code. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Dr. Bradley Nelson. Welcome, Dr. Brad.
Thank you, Victor. It's really great to be here.
And thank you for joining us and sharing your very important message. So, Dr. Brad, your path started early on with health challenges that shaped your approach to both life and healing. Please share this with our listeners.
Well, absolutely. My story really begins at age 7. I was really sick with the measles, and I had overheard my parents talking. You know how parents will talk and even sometimes in front of kids, thinking that they're not really listening. But I was listening, and I knew the plan was that I was going to be admitted to the hospital the next day, and I was going into something called an oxygen tent. Now, being 7 years old, the tent part of that sounded kind of fun, but I was really way too sick to think about camping. And so my parents had made a bed for me on the couch in the living room so I could be near their bedroom. And this particular night, everyone else had gone to bed, and I'm lying there just feeling really ill. And my parents came into the room, and my mother said to my father, she said, honey, will you kneel down with me and say a prayer for our boy so that he'll be able to get well? So they did. Now, my dad wasn't a preacher or a pastor or anything like that. He was in real estate and construction. And, but I think they were really very worried about me. And so they knelt down by the side of the couch. My father starts offering this prayer. And in the middle of this prayer, something really dramatic happened that it's hard to describe, but this change began at the top of my head, and it went whoosh through my body to the soles of my feet, and I was instantaneously healed. Now, I was only 7, but I remember everything that happened in that event. And to go from being really, really just desperately ill one moment to being completely vibrantly healthy in the next instant is something that is so bizarre and so unique and so singular and kind of so impossible that you can't forget it. I mean, that event is burned in every cell of my body. And I remember I held my tongue until my father was done speaking, and then when he praying, and then when he was done, I said, "I'm better. I'm totally better." And they said, "That's fine. Go back to sleep. Tomorrow you're going into the oxygen tent." And they didn't say that, but I knew that was kind of the plan. Well, the next day proved that I was totally better. That experience taught me that there is a higher power. There's an unseen power that we can draw upon in times of need. So I filed that away. Well, about 7 years later, you know how things run in those 7-year cycles in our lives, I started having these pains in my back. And, being 13 years old, I tried to ignore them, but then all of a sudden they just reached this unbelievable crescendo where the pains that would strike me completely out of the blue would just take my breath away or literally put me on the ground. And it was kind of terrifying, frankly. And my parents are very worried. They took me to the hospital, and they ran these tests, and my parents were told that I had kidney disease. I found out all of this out later. But they were told that what I had was potentially fatal. I had about a 50-50 chance of surviving. They told me that I shouldn't run around or be very physically active. And they didn't even need to tell me that because I was already walking on eggshells. But there was nothing they had to offer me. Western medicine had nothing. And they didn't do kidney transplants back then. My kidneys were in the process of, they were battling for their lives. And if they died, that was it for me. I was done. So my mother was very much a health nut back in the day when, if you believed in vitamins, you were considered actually to be somewhat off of your nut. To be a little bit crazy.
What decade was this?
This was in about, let's see, it would have been, I was 13. So it would have been in about 1970.
Okay.
And so it was quite a while ago. Anyway, so they decided they were going to take me to get some alternative help. And so they took me to see some holistic doctors who practiced out on the edge of town in the middle of a wheat field in a trailer house. And what I noticed when I would go to these other doctors was that sometimes there would be a busload of people pulling away as we were pulling in. People would rent buses from other states and they would charter buses and drive out and see these people that were kind of considered to be miracle workers. And they started working with me. And sure enough, my body immediately started responding. My pains very quickly became less and less frequent and less severe. Within about 3 weeks, I wasn't having any more pain at all. And within about a month, my folks took me back to the clinic and they ran all the tests. And as I recall, they ran the tests twice. I said, well, it's a spontaneous remission. It's remarkable. Whatever we did must have helped. But I knew that these people hadn't done anything. I mean, I was only 13, but I wasn't stupid. I knew it was those other doctors out in that trailer house out on the edge of town. They were the ones that had helped me. So I decided at that point, 13 years old, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. And if I need to practice out on the edge of town in a trailer house in the middle of a wheat field, that's okay. Because to me, that seemed to be, at age 13, the natural habitat of doctors who seem to get results. So that was an interesting thing. I experienced that. And I can remember lying on my back on their table and looking up at them as they were working with me. And I would say, I want to do what you do when I grow up. And they were very discouraging to me. They would say, no, you don't. They would say, if you go to chiropractic school or naturopathic school, they'll fill your head so full of fixed ideas that you won't be able to think for yourself when you get out. You'll be like a zombie. Well, I believed everything they told me. I believed that they had saved my life. And so later when I got, and really it was an answer to prayer for me, literally, to go into the healing arts. I went to chiropractic school, and I was very much on guard the whole time I was in school. It was a great experience, but when my instructors would say things like, oh, this is the best way to fix this or the best way to do this, I would always inevitably think, well, maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. Maybe there's a better way. And I can remember listening to my neurology instructor one day talking about how the brain is essentially a computer, and it's the most amazing computer that we know of in the universe. And by that time, I had actually been a computer programmer for a number of years. And I had a business back in the early 80s called the Computer Tutor. So I thought that was pretty clever. And I would go into people's businesses back in the day when computers were brand new and they didn't know what to do with them. And I would program, I'd write their software so they could get some use out of this machine they'd bought. So as my instructor is saying this, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, if the brain is really a computer, will we ever be able to access it and get the information out of it that must be in there? Because that would be such an amazing way to find out what patients really need, right? Makes sense, don't you think, Victor?
Absolutely.
It made perfect sense to me. So when I got out of school, I worked for another guy for a little while. It was kind of a mentor, and I learned some things about asking questions and getting answers from the subconscious mind. It turns out that the brain is a binary computer, and you can ask any question that you want, and the answers will manifest in either strength or weakness. In other words, if you ask a question, if you pose a question to the subconscious mind and the answer is yes, what will happen is the body will be strong, muscles will be strong. On the other hand, if you ask the body a question, you pose a question to the subconscious mind, if the answer that's coming back from the body is a no, the body will be slightly weaker. So there's this change that takes place in this binary computer system that is our physical body. So I learned that I could ask questions and I could get answers from my patients' bodies. And that was really how things began for me. And so it was a process of many years, really. I practiced for about 20 years in one form or another. And it was a slow process of learning patient by patient, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. And there was one other thing that was really a key for me, and that goes back to when I was 7 years old, and my father had prayed for me, and I had had that miraculous healing. And that was that I got in the habit of asking for help from up above, from God, and we all believe different things. But, if you believe in a higher power, you can relate to this. I would just say a short prayer before I would work on somebody. It was a totally private, totally personal habit. Nobody in all those years ever knew that I was actually trying to make a connection to the divine so that I could open that conduit and actually get a little help from up above for them. And it was just a routine thing. It was a habit that I developed over many years. But I'll tell you something, Victor, what I learned is that, whatever you believe in about a higher power, whatever you may believe in, I'm here to tell you that there were times during all of those years when people would come in to see me and I didn't really know what to do. They'd have something going on. I didn't know how to approach. I didn't know how to help them. And I would offer that short, silent plea for help. And sometimes in those cases, the information that I needed would just flood into me like an avalanche of understanding. And sometimes it included ways of looking at things that nobody had ever considered before, and that I certainly would never have thought of. And it was really an incredible thing. That happened just a very few times. I mean, I can count those times on one hand over the course of 20 years. But anyway, that has really been the linchpin, I'd say, to all of this work that I've tried to help develop. And it was just really to help my patients. And so what ended up happening was I got a message really from up above in about 2003 that it was time for me to get out of my practice. I had learned enough, and now I needed to start sharing it with the world. And so I got out of practice, published the Emotion Code, the one that you just showed, the black cover, in 2007. And then, of course, in 2019, we republished it as a hardcover book in association with St. Martin's Press, with a foreword by Tony Robbins. And it's just such a fascinating thing because I've seen so many incredible miracles really in my life, but it all comes down to understanding that these bodies of ours are happiest when we treat them for what they really are. And what they really are is not instantly apparent, because what they really are is very complex energy fields. And if you talk to anybody who studies physics, any quantum physicist, they'll all tell you, well, yeah, that's right. The human body, in fact, everything is made of energy. Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And that's really what this work is all about.
So as you mentioned, in 2019, St. Martin's Press published the latest iteration of the Emotion Code. What's new in the book and the world of energy healing?
Well, I'll tell you what's new in the Emotion Code book is we added, I think, 60 new subsections. We added a whole nother chapter to the book on inherited emotional baggage. That's the baggage that's weighing you down now that you picked up from maybe your 8th great grandmother who who knows what happened. We all have inherited baggage. There's just a lot more stories in this book. See, when I wrote the first book, or when it came out in 2007, all the stories really were my own personal stories. And part of the reason I was excited to write the book was because I was afraid I was going to start forgetting these things that had happened. So I was able to get them down on paper. But with the new version of the Emotion Code, we've been able to add a lot of stories from other people around the world, because the book now is in, I think, 21 languages, more all the time. Our company, Discover Healing, the company that my wife and I head, is really a teaching company. What we do is we teach people and we certify people in the Emotion Code and some other work that we do. And we've certified almost 10,000 people now in 80 countries around the world.
Wow,
so,
that's wonderful.
Yeah. So we're going to be doing, we're leaving in a month to do seminars in Istanbul and Warsaw, Poland, in different places in Germany, hopefully Budapest and Prague. And so, it's been a fascinating thing and really a lot of fun and very gratifying to see how people's lives are changing around the world. It was funny because when I was in practice, toward the last few years of my practice, I just had this burning urge to teach people how to help themselves. And that has manifested into this work that we do now, because there's so much that people can do for themselves. Most of the time, when people aren't feeling well or their life is not working well, they don't need a drug most of the time. They don't need surgery most of the time. And that's really all that Western medicine has to offer. And those things are fantastic in the case of traumatic injuries, for example. But most of the time, that isn't what most people really need. And most of the time, if they just have emotional baggage, and if you remove that emotional baggage, things improve in most cases.
And you call those trapped emotions. What are trapped emotions and how do they affect our health?
Well, it's a fascinating thing. When we experience an emotion, something happens and we start to feel a certain emotion, we go through this little process. It's like a loop. You start at the bottom, you start feeling this emotion, and you feel the physical and the mental, emotional responses to whatever's going on. And you contemplate that a little bit. And then that event ends and that emotion is basically just finished with, you're done with it, and you're able to move on with your life. And we go through these all the time, these little emotional loops or sequences. Every time you have an emotion that you feel, you're going through one of these little emotional loops. Sometimes what happens is that little emotional loop that we should go through, that little cycle of each emotion, that little process gets interrupted. Let's say, for example, as a child, you learn that maybe your dad's a rageaholic and you learn that anger is a really bad emotion. And so then later in your life, something happens, somebody does you wrong, and you'd be justified to feel that emotion, and it starts to come up for you, but you've learned that it's a bad thing. And so you just suppress that. Well, it's going to come out later somewhere else because that loop now has been interrupted. Sometimes things happen to us and we feel an emotion and we decide to become very engaged with that emotion, and we decide to amplify that emotion and make it much bigger than it otherwise would have been. And when an emotion is very powerful like that and very intense, that also can break that little process so that the emotional energy can become trapped in the body, either one of those two kinds of situations. And so we call it a trapped emotion. Now, if you think about it, I was talking before about how the body is an energy field. I mean, if you look at your hand, for example, you've seen that hand before and it seems solid. But if you were to take a big enough microscope and zoom in somewhere over 1 million power magnification on your hand, you might be looking at a single individual atom, and the next atom is a long distance away. And if you look inside that atom in front of you, you'd see there's really nothing in there, just empty space. And then there's some little infinitesimally tiny energies that are zipping around at the speed of light, protons, electrons, and so on. And that's really what we are. So when you're feeling an intense emotion, what's going on a quantum level is that you're feeling a new frequency, a new vibration. And what we believe is that every emotion is a different frequency. So anger is a different frequency than grief, and that's different from discouragement, and that's different from panic. They're all different. But again, if that energy is either stuffed and buried or it's just very intense, the energy can then become trapped in the body. So a trapped emotion, and literally this is what our emotional baggage is. And it took me a long time to figure this out, but I had the perfect laboratory because I had patients coming in to see me all day long, every day for years. And I was trying to figure out what was really wrong with them, see? And so what happens to us is in that moment, when that emotional energy becomes trapped, that little loop, that little emotional process has been interrupted, and the energy of that emotion now is not resolved. So it stays in the body. And what we believe is that a trapped emotion is a ball of energy, a ball of emotional frequency, if you can imagine, from about the size of a baseball to about the size of a softball. And what these do is they inhabit our bodies. They can lodge anywhere in the body, and they can cause all kinds of physical and mental and emotional symptoms. I'll give you a great example, a couple of examples. There was a woman that came in to see me many years ago, and I was first kind of figuring this out. She thought she was having a heart attack. She had crushing chest pain, difficulty breathing. Left side of her face was totally numb. Her left arm was totally numb. And boy, this looks like a heart attack. And I told my staff, hey, we might need an ambulance. Luckily, we were right next to a medical center. But I said, give me 1 minute with her. And so I brought her into my treatment room, and I started doing some testing and started asking some questions, directing those questions at her subconscious mind, and then getting the answers from that internal computer through muscle strength by testing her arm, her outstretched arm. And I started asking questions. And what I found very quickly was she had a trapped emotion that was part of this symptom set. And the trapped emotion was grief. And I dug a little deeper, asked a few more questions, and found that this had occurred about 3 years before. This grief emotion was very powerful, but it happened about 3 years before. And when I arrived at that, all of a sudden she burst into tears. And she said, I can't believe that's affecting me. She said, I thought I dealt with all that. And I said, well, what in the world happened to you? And she said that her husband had been having an affair, unbeknownst to her. And 3 years before, she found out about it and confronted him with the evidence, and the marriage blew up, and they ended up getting a divorce, and she spent a year in therapy dealing with it, and then had recently gotten remarried. So she was with a new husband now. That husband was just her ex. And as far as she was concerned, he was history. But as far as her body was concerned, the grief that she felt from being so betrayed, she was really deeply in love with that guy, and she thought she was going to be with him forever. But the grief that she felt was so strong that it didn't get processed. And so it was still there. And so I released that trapped emotion. And to release a trapped emotion, typically we'll use a magnet, or you can swipe your hand just right down the back, right down the middle of the back, down a little meridian there that we call the governing meridian. And the feeling came back into her arm and into her face within about 3 seconds. The chest pain was suddenly gone. The difficulty breathing was suddenly gone. She left the office 10 minutes later after joking with me and my staff. And I remember after she left, sitting at my desk, and my head was spinning. I was thinking, what did I just witness? How is it possible, right? And I'm still in touch with her. And that was 30 years ago, sometimes probably 30 years ago. And she's still doing fine. But I'll tell you something. I think, Victor, that she would have been one of those people who would have died of a heart attack, and nobody would have known or realized that it was really her husband's affair that killed her.
And we're going to have to take a break at this point. My guest is Dr. Brad Nelson. His book is called The Emotion Code. Dr. Brad, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work.
Absolutely. The book is available on Amazon and audible.com for the audio version. It's available wherever books are sold and on our website at discoverhealing.com.
And we'll be back with more of Dr. Brad Nelson and the Emotion Code after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Brad Nelson. His book is The Emotion Code. Dr. Brad, how do you determine if physical symptoms are related to those emotional blockages, those trapped emotions?
Well, during all the years that I was in practice, what I found by asking the subconscious mind of each patient what was really going on, what they really needed, what I found was that all of the physical symptoms that my patients were dealing with, or nearly all, were related to something else. So in other words, about 80 to 90% of the time, their pain, for example, was being caused by emotional baggage. And there are other things, of course, that can cause physical pain, but it's a very, very high ratio. To give you an idea, some of the things that I've seen, I'll share a story with you. There was a man that came in to see me one day who had really severe low back pain. It was a 9 on a 0 to 10 scale of pain. If it's 10, you're going to the ER, calling an ambulance. So he's a 9. It's been going on for a few weeks. And I did some testing on him, started asking his subconscious mind what was going on, and found that he had a trapped emotion. Now, in his case, the trapped emotion was anger. And as I asked a few more questions, I found out that his subconscious mind said, that this had happened about 20 years before. And immediately he piped up and said, okay, I know what that's about. He was falsely accused of something in a business he was in, and he was really, really very angry about it. Well, that it was so powerful, that emotion was so powerful that energy became trapped in his body. So you see, what happens is trapped emotions have two effects on us. They affect us physically and they affect us emotionally. And so in his case, what was going on the physical side was that this emotional energy had lodged, for whatever reason, in his low back. Now, think about it this way. The body is just a very complex energy field. So when you introduce another kind of energy, in this case, literally a ball of anger into his low back. Now what's going on is that emotional energy is continually distorting. It's creating this distorting, this imbalancing force now in his low back, affecting his energy field, distorting his energy field, literally. And the body is really just an energy field anyway. And so that eventually, after 20 years, was really causing severe symptoms. Well, I released that trapped emotion, and that just takes a few seconds. And immediately, the pain went from a 9 to a 0. And he couldn't believe it. He looked at me and he started walking around and bending over and twisting this way and that way and exclaiming. And I was grateful that it worked so well. And it didn't come back. Well, a couple of days later, he came back in. And this illustrates the other side of this. Remember, it was a trapped emotion of anger, literally a ball of anger in his low back. So a couple of days later, he comes back into me and he says, Dr. Nelson, he said, my back pain is still gone. I said, I still can't believe it. But he said, I have to tell you something. He said, when I came in here, I had another problem I didn't tell you about. He said, for as long as I can remember, I've basically been what you would call a rageaholic. He said, I'm always yelling at my wife and my kids. I got to watch the road rage. I've been to anger management several times. Hasn't really helped me. He said, I'm just kind of tightly wound. But he said, since you released that trapped emotion of anger from me, he said, I feel really different. He said, things that used to set me off now don't. And he said, I just feel kind of relaxed and kind of peaceful. And I haven't felt this way before. He said, how did that work? How did you do that? And at the time I said, well, I really don't know. But what we think and what I believe is that, think about this guy. He's got this ball of anger in his low back, literally this ball of emotion stuck there for 20 years, distorting that energy field in his low back. But think about this. When a situation would come along in his life where he might tend to feel the emotion of anger, he would feel that emotion much more easily, much more readily than he otherwise would have. Why? Because part of his body was already vibrating at that frequency, you see. And so when we feel an emotion, what we're doing is we're feeling a certain frequency of vibration, a certain energy. And so he would fall right into that. So when I released that trapped emotion, suddenly that energy was gone. And so we removed a big ball of energy, of anger from his body, and then he didn't feel like a rageaholic anymore. So if you think about all of the emotions that we experience, and you think about the intense emotional events that you've been through in your life, and you and I were talking a little earlier about some of the things that you've been through, and we've all been through things that we would rather not have gone through. Maybe it's a death in the family, or maybe we're abused, or maybe we go through a divorce or a breakup or something. And sometimes that energy just stays with us. And then what those energies do is they distort how we experience life. They interfere with our ability to really create the life that we want. And trapped emotions, I have found, are an underlying cause of illness that seems to always be there. Every disease process that I have seen now in 33 years of doing this, there has always been emotional baggage. And sometimes I feel like, really the world needs to know this. And that's why I wrote the book. But sometimes it's like if you're a detective and every time you get a call on a bank robbery, you see the same white van parked down the street, you might start to get suspicious. And that's how it's been for me. Yeah.
So you have anger manifesting in pain. What about fear?
Same thing. Any emotion that is trapped in the body can manifest as pain. But then, of course, there's the whole other side of it. I mean, trapped emotions manifest as things like depression and anxiety, phobias, panic attacks, PTSD, or post-traumatic stress syndrome, eating disorders, self-sabotage of all kinds. But then they also are linked to things like asthma and digestive disorders, infertility, autoimmune disorders, every kind of disease process you can imagine will typically have some kind of an emotional root. And, it's just so interesting because sometimes that's the only reason. In fact, I'll tell you a case where I believe that really it was the reason. There was a woman that came in to see me. She was, I think, 72 years old, and started working with her. And the very first thing that I found with her on her very first visit was that she had a trapped emotion of sadness. And her subconscious mind wanted me to dig a little deeper. So I asked some more questions and figured out that this trapped emotion became lodged in her body in 1963. Wow. And I thought, 63, gee, I remember 63. So I dug a little deeper, and sure enough, it was in November of 63. And it was then, of course, about the JFK assassination. And so when I arrived at that, she started to cry. And through her tears, she told me that affected her so deeply, and like it did everybody. But she said that when JFK Jr. was killed in the plane crash, she said it was like all of that emotion came back, and for days, all she could do was cry. And she couldn't work. She couldn't do anything. She was just in an absolute state of grief over JFK Jr. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting because, I know the family members, I'm sure, were in that kind of a state, but he's a public figure, but that's interesting. And I thought, well, if she's got a trapped emotion about the first JFK, then the next JFK that died, that makes sense that it would all come back. So I thought to myself, I wonder where this energy has been, this ball of emotional energy. Where has this been all of her life? Where is it? Where did it land in her body? And what has it done to her? And so I started asking some questions. Now, if you can imagine, she's holding one arm out parallel to the floor. I'm just asking questions, trying to get information, and her arm is staying strong against my downward pressure for yes, and it's going weak for no answers from her subconscious mind. So what I did is I thought, well, let's ask some questions. And I said, okay, this emotional energy, is it trapped on the right side of your body? And that was a no from her subconscious. Her arm went down. So then I said, well, okay, it must be on the left side then. I said, is it below your diaphragm? The diaphragm is a good dividing line between the upper body and the lower body. And on one side, you've got the abdomen, and then you've got the chest on the other side. And her subconscious mind said no. So it was on the left side, but above the diaphragm. And so it turned out, after asking a couple more questions, that this energy was trapped right in the area of the left chest wall, or where her breast used to be, because 4 years before that breast had been removed. And that's where that energy was. And I had totally forgotten about that. She had told me that in her exam. And all of a sudden, when I discovered that, she and I are just looking at each other like a couple of owls with these really big eyes. Oh my gosh. And so think about it. It's so interesting, but they have found with, for example, German new medicine and other people have found that do this sort of work, that if you're a woman and you have a relationship that breaks up, or there's something that's relationship related, oftentimes the trapped emotions will go to the breasts or to the reproductive organs. And it's one of the things that I have found in my own career, working, for example, with the occasional cancer patient. I would always tell them, look, I don't treat cancer. The emotion code isn't about treating any kind of disease. All we're doing is trying to find baggage or these energies that shouldn't be there, to remove them so your body can get well. But every cancer case that I have seen has always had emotional baggage. There's always emotional energy there. And, if you think about it, we probably all know somebody who developed cancer, maybe a year or two or something after some traumatic event happened, or they lost their spouse or whatever. And that kind of emotional baggage can be found and it can be removed. And then that helps the body to be able to heal. I think that's been my experience.
And you're also talking about that upper left-hand quadrant, the location of that organ that we call our heart. And you write that the heart is more than just a pump.
Well, it absolutely is. And this really, in the modern era, goes back to the 1960s, when doctors first started doing heart transplants. And it didn't take too long before they started noticing something strange. And that was that sometimes people would come back to the doctor after the transplant, and they would relate strange things. They would talk about how suddenly their taste in food or sports or music would have radically changed. And sometimes sometimes their handwriting would have changed dramatically after a heart transplant. And sometimes they would have memories of being in places that they never in their life had ever visited. I mean, imagine having a heart transplant and suddenly now you have memories of being in Rome and you've never in your whole life visited there. This kind of thing. There are books written about this. It's called cellular memory. In the heart, when you get a heart transplant, these are the kind of things that happen. Well, in every case that I've ever read, when people are, these transplant recipients are connected with the family of the heart donor, they find out things like, well, yes, our daughter was a concert violinist, and now you love classical music like she did. Yes, and those pieces that you can't seem to get out of your head, those were her favorite pieces, and she was practicing those before she was killed. Or they would say things like, well, yes, that's our son's handwriting that you have. How bizarre. Or yes, our son visited Rome every year for years, and he loved Rome. It was his favorite city. And now you have memories of being in Rome, and you say you've never actually been there before. That's really bizarre. Those must be his memories in some weird way. Well, so anyway, anciently, the ancient peoples believed that the heart was the seat of the soul and the source of love and creativity and romance and really the core of our being. And in the West, we've never really given any credence to those ideas. Although if it's Valentine's Day, you might get something shaped like a heart. Okay. Like maybe a little candy or maybe a box of chocolates if you're lucky, right? So this symbol of the heart is in every society that I've looked at around the world. And these understandings about the heart go back since time out of mind. And it's so interesting that in the modern era, now we're finally starting to uncover, using the instrumentation that's been developed over the last 20 or 30 years, that actually can measure the magnetic field of the heart. And the heart puts out this magnetic field that surrounds the body up to, 12 feet in diameter. And they found that when one person's feeling love or affection for another person, their heartbeat actually shows up in that other person's brainwaves, and their heart rates will synchronize. And so there's a whole lot going on with the heart that we have not really been aware of. And what I was led to discover was that when a person feels like their heart is going to break, the subconscious mind will put up a wall around that heart to protect that heart from being broken. And that wall is made of emotional baggage. That wall is made of trapped emotions. And it's been called the most important discovery in the history of energy medicine. I never would have figured it out on my own. It was something that was shown to me really from above. And so it's really, I think, the most important thing that people can do for themselves, because about 93% of people have this phenomenon going on. And when you have a heart wall, it makes it more difficult for you to connect with other people, makes it more difficult for you to give and receive love and so on. And when that wall is taken down, creative ideas start to flow. For many people, people fall in love who never, ever thought they would, even in advanced ages. People have told us that for the first time in their life, they can feel joy, or they can feel love, or for the first time in their life, they can feel the love of the Creator for them. It's a very profound thing. And yet the world that we live in is a sick world, really, because 93% of people or so have this wall that's been put up.
And we're going to come back in the next segment and talk about bringing that wall down. My guest is Dr. Brad Nelson. His book is called The Emotion Code. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn. But not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
back on Vox Novus. My guest this week is Dr. Brad Nelson. His book is called The Emotion Code. Dr. Brad, in the last segment, you were talking about the heart wall and how you coined this phrase, the heart wall. How can people heal the heart wall or break it down?
Well, the instructions are all in the Emotion Code book. It's actually really simple, and lots of people have done it for themselves around the world. And so it's not hard really at all. It's just something that it takes a little bit of time each day for a little while, and then doesn't take any more time at all because it's done. Let me share a story with you. Just a couple of really quick quotes from people. A woman wrote in after her heart wall was removed. Her name was Luana. She said, "The relief is unexplainable to the point of shedding tears of joy for the release of carrying such heavy burdens for so many years. What a wonderful feeling of release that I never dreamed would come true." Another one, let's see. There's so many of these wonderful, wonderful stories. Let's see.
Did you ever have a heart wall?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did. Yep.
Why don't you tell us your story?
Well, what happened for me was that I had a heart wall that had been put up because of some things that I had been through in my life, and getting rid of it was something that helped me to really step into my own state of being and to become more in an honest way who I really was supposed to be. And so, it's interesting. I'll tell you one quick story. There was my favorite story. It's actually in the Emotion Code book, but there was a woman that came in to see me one day who's a nurse, and she came in for neck pain, and she's seen a couple of other doctors that hadn't been able to help her. I found that as I was talking with her, it was very interesting. She said that she was celibate. She hadn't dated in 8 years, was never going to date again, and was going to die single. And she was dead serious about this. And I said, "Well, what happened?" And she said 8 years before, her boyfriend dumped her, and that she was really in love with him and broke her heart. So I tested her, found she had a heart wall, and there were three emotional layers, three trapped emotions making up this wall around her heart, this invisible wall. So I cleared those three trapped emotions. All of a sudden, the wall was gone. And with it went the neck pain. The neck pain was suddenly just totally, instantly gone, completely gone. And so she left the office feeling totally fine. Well, she comes back into the office 3 months later, and I remembered her immediately. And I said, "Hey, how are you? I haven't seen you for a while." She said, she said, "My neck has been fine since I was here." But she said, "You cleared that heart wall for me, and that really works." She said, when I was last time I was here, about 2 weeks after that, after you cleared the heart wall, I found out my childhood sweetheart has been living right around the corner for me for almost 8 years, and we're in love, and we're dating, and I think he's going to ask me to marry him. So a huge shift all of a sudden for a woman like that. And so the heart wall has a big effect, I believe, on your immune system. I think it has a big effect on how you are creating your life and what you're able to manifest. So it's a great thing to get rid of. And you can go to our website at discoverhealing.com. You can find a practitioner there. We've got a map of the whole entire world. It can be done at a distance. But you can also learn how to do it yourself just from the book.
And clearing the heart wall evidently also opens the possibility for synchronicity and for the wonderful things to happen.
Well, yes, because all of that is driven by the heart. See, when you find your soulmate, you can look for your soulmate for 1,000 years using the brain that's in your head. But if you're using the brain that's in your heart and it's unlocked and functioning, you can find your soulmate in a much shorter time frame.
Absolutely. You created a self-study course called The Body Code to help people uncover and overcome the root causes of discomfort and illness. What are these hidden causes?
Well, what happens to us, and by the way, what this is really, the Body Code is a system that I developed during the years that I was in practice working with people that have been told there was really no hope for them at all, no help for them available in Western medicine. So they'd come to see me and they would have major diseases. And what I would do is I would ask their subconscious mind why they were manifesting this disease. And the subconscious mind, I could get those answers from the subconscious. And because I used to be a computer programmer, I always had a computer there with me, and I was always cataloging the things I was finding on people. And so it turns out there are really 6 kinds of imbalances that we suffer from that cause all of our physical and mental and emotional symptoms. So those are things like trapped emotions, like we've been talking about. Sometimes they're the energy of physical or emotional traumas that we've had. Sometimes there are imbalances in the circuitry or the systems of the body, or disconnections between the spirit and the physical part of the body. Sometimes they're toxins. Maybe you got bitten by a spider, or maybe you've got some metal fillings still that are leaching out mercury, or who knows, maybe you've had a vaccine and that energy is affecting you. Maybe you've got some kind of a pathogen in the body. Maybe you're dealing with some kind of a virus or a fungal or mold infection or a parasite. Your subconscious mind knows all of these things in intimate detail with a perfect understanding. Maybe you've got some bones or organs or something out of alignment. You can find those too. And maybe you're dealing with some kind of a nutritional deficiency, or maybe you need an essential oil. Maybe you're dehydrated. Maybe your magnetic field is out of balance. Maybe you need a certain herb or spice. The body code is a mind mapping system that essentially provides an interface for the subconscious mind. And so, in other words, using it, we can very, very rapidly drill down and find the actual true underlying causes of problems and fix those so that so the body can function normally. And how this came about really was, I had great results with the patients I was working with, but then about a year after the Emotion Code book came out, I woke up one morning, my mind was full of instruction. It said, you need to take everything you've learned about natural healing, put it into a self-study course that anyone can learn, and make it available to everyone everywhere. And so that's what it is. We call it the body code. And
that's wonderful. And for those who are listening, you had talked about training and certifying 10,000 practitioners. Somebody wants to get involved in this. How do they do that?
Well, what they can do is they can go to discoverhealing.com, and all the information is there. Certification is not expensive. We have about, I'd say 70% of the people that go through certification want to end up doing it for a living, or they want to make some additional money. And they can certainly do that. And it's nice because in our day and age, all you need is a laptop, and you can have a practice that can span the globe, and you can travel the rest of your life if you want, because there's no barrier of distance to this work. So it's very interesting and very unique. We have different levels of certification. Level 1 is Emotion Code. Level 2 is Body Code. And we'll be introducing another level later on this year called the Belief Code. But it all builds on builds on the previous levels. And what we're doing is we're taking people that don't know anything about healing at all, and we're turning them into powerful healers. So fun stuff. And
of course, as the saying goes, heal thyself. That's an important part of this, isn't it?
Well, right. And what we find with people is that when they get into the certification program for the Emotion Code and then the Body Code, sometimes people think that they need to be healed to be able to be a healer. But what happens is when you start helping other people to get well, it inevitably helps you to get well and to get healed. So healers get healed by healing.
As you heal, you are healed.
Yeah, that's kind of how it works.
That's wonderful. My guest is Dr. Brad Nelson. His book is called The Emotion Code. Dr. Brad, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your book and everything that you have to offer on your website.
Well, again, our website is at discoverhealing.com. And people can go get the book. In fact, I'd urge you to go get the book, go to discoverhealing.com, and you can get the first couple of chapters for free to try out. And if you like it, you can buy the book on Amazon, anywhere books are sold. The book's available on Audible, of course, too, if you like to listen to books like I do. And Discover Healing can tell you all about the Body Code, all about the Emotion Code. There's lots of information there. You can read testimonials from people from literally all over the world. And you can look at a big Google map of practitioners all over the world, 80 countries. So there you go.
Dr. Brad, if you had a message for our listeners tonight, what would it be?
Well, the message, thank you. The message is that that there is a higher power, I call that higher power Father. That's, to me, seems accurate and more familial. And I know for a fact that higher power loves you and is aware of you and wants you to be happy and wants you to be successful. I really have come to know that higher power is nothing but absolute love for us, and wants us to succeed, but doesn't interfere with our lives. And so we get to choose. We're not forced one way or the other, but it's all about love, really, and it's all about ascension and stepping into your own power and stepping into these healing abilities and taking back that healing birthright that belongs to all of us, but that most of us are not really aware even exists. But that's what this work is about. It's about giving back that healing birthright to every man, woman, and child on this planet.
And embracing that love and finding that within ourselves is the ultimate healing, isn't it?
Yep. That's it.
Dr. Brad Nelson, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your amazing work and your wisdom and experience.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks so much for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.